On December 19, 1944, in the cold fields north of Bastogne, about 700 Americans stood in the path of German armor. They did not look like men who could change history. They were cold. They were tired. Many had not slept. Their boots were wet. Their hands were numb. Some had tanks. Some had rifles. Some had machine guns. Some had almost nothing but fear and orders. In front of them came German power. Behind them was Bastogne. And behind Bastogne was the road system that Adolf Hitler needed if his last great attack in the West was going to work. Before we continue, take 1 second to like this video and subscribe to the channel. It helps more people find these forgotten stories of courage. The strange question is still asked today. Why do records show 700 Americans holding back forces tied to several German divisions near Bastogne? The answer is not simple. It is not a fairy tale. It does not mean 700 men defeated 4 SS divisions alone. 4 SS divisions fought in the wider Ardennes battle, while the hard pressure around Bastogne came from German Panzer and infantry formations like the 2nd Panzer Division, Panzer Lehr, and the 26th Volksgrenadier Division. But the records do show something just as powerful. Small American groups, sometimes only a few hundred men, stopped German speed at the exact roads where speed mattered most. And in the Battle of the Bulge, speed was everything. The German plan began before sunrise on December 16, 1944. It became a story families would tell with pride and pain. Hitler called the attack watch on the Rhine. The goal was to break through the Ardennes forest, cross the Meuse River, reach Antwerp, and split the Allied armies. It was a huge gamble. It needed surprise. It needed fog. It needed confusion. It needed roads. Bastogne was one of those road centers. The town was not large. It was not beautiful in a famous way. The real record is more powerful because it is more human. It was a quiet place in Belgium with farms, stone houses, narrow streets, and cold winds. But on a military map, Bastogne was gold. Roads ran through it like spokes on a wheel. If the Germans took Bastogne fast, their tanks could move west. If Bastogne stayed in American hands, German movement slowed, jammed, and broke. That was why this small town became a trap, a shield, and a legend. Only a few weeks earlier, many American soldiers thought the worst fighting might be behind them. The Allied armies had crossed France after D-Day. Paris was free. Germany looked weaker. In homes across America, families were getting ready for Christmas. Mothers saved letters. Wives looked at photographs. Children asked when fathers would come home. Some soldiers wrote home about cold weather, muddy roads, and hope. They dreamed of warm kitchens, clean clothes, and quiet streets. They did not know that Hitler was preparing one more blow. That was the first secret of Bastogne. The German attack came through a place the Allies believed was too hard for a major winter assault. The forest seemed like a wall. The weather was bad. Allied planes could not see well. German columns moved in the dark. English-speaking German soldiers in American uniforms caused fear and confusion behind the lines. Roads filled with refugees, broken vehicles, and lost units. But at Bastogne, that secret lost its power. It felt like the forest itself had betrayed the Americans. It included tanks, armored infantry, and later men linked with the 101st Airborne. On December 18th, the 101st Airborne Division was rushed from France toward Bastogne. Many of these paratroopers had fought in Normandy and the Netherlands. They were veterans, but they were not rested. Some had no full winter gear. They moved fast in trucks, packed tight, with little time to plan. It needed fuel. They were not alone. Combat Command B of the 10th Armored Division reached the area before them. These tankers were not there by chance. They were sent forward to block roads and delay the German advance. Under Colonel William Roberts, small armored teams were pushed out like steel fingers from Bastogne. Air support struck German positions. Their job was not to win a clean battle. Their job was to hold, delay, confuse, and bleed the German advance. This is where the story of the 700 becomes important. One of these groups formed around Major Charles Desibray. This is the family side of the battle. His force moved to Nauville, a village north of Bastogne. The numbers were small compared to the German columns moving through the area. Some accounts speak of a few hundred at first, then more men added as the fight grew. Around 700 Americans in and around that forward position became part of a much larger act of delay. They stood near a village most people had never heard of, but that village sat near the road German armor wanted. The Germans needed Bastogne quickly. They did not need a long fight. The medics kept men alive. They needed open roads, fuel, bridges, and movement. Every hour mattered. Every blocked road hurt them. Every burning tank became a sign that the plan was slowing down. The Americans did not have to destroy the German army at Nauville. They only had to make it late. That is why the records feel almost impossible. A small force can look weak on paper. The records are not saying that 700 Americans stood in a straight line and pushed back 4 full SS divisions. The honest answer is this, but if it sits in the right place at the right hour, with the right will, it can stop a giant from moving. This was the hard truth that began to form in the snow. The German High Command wanted speed. The American defenders gave them delay, and delay at Bastogne was deadly. As the Germans closed around the town, the story moved from one road to many roads, from one village to a full circle of defense, and from a small blocking force to an entire town under siege. No fear shown to the enemy. The fight for Bastogne was not one clean battle. It was a storm of small fights. There were crossroads, farms, woods, frozen fields, and villages where men fought for houses, barns, tree lines, and roads. On December 26th, elements of the 4th Armored Division reached Bastogne. The map looked simple from far away, but on the ground, every lane was a question of life or death. At Nauville, the American force under Major Desibray became one of the most important roadblocks. German armor from the 2nd Panzer Division was trying to move past Bastogne and continue west. The 2nd Panzer was not a weak unit. It had tanks, guns, experience, and orders to move fast. The Americans in Nauville did not have the size to beat such a force in a normal, open fight. But they had cover. They had tanks. They had anti-tank fire. They had paratroopers. And they had one great advantage. The Germans had to come through them. The village became a killing ground for time. Sherman tanks fired from hidden places. Tank destroyers waited for German armor to show itself. Riflemen held close positions. Buildings shook, roads filled with smoke. German tanks that should have been racing west were forced to slow, turn, fire, and search. Every minute lost there helped Bastogne. But by now, Bastogne had become more than a road junction. This is the part of the story that many people miss. It shows how a small force at Naval helped break the rhythm of a much larger German advance. It shows how a few hundred men, used at the right point, could affect the timing of an entire operation. War is often decided by numbers, but sometimes it is decided by hours. At Bastogne, the Germans lost hours they could never get back. While the forward teams fought, the 101st Airborne built the main defense around Bastogne. Soldiers tried to sleep in holes in frozen ground. The 501st, 502nd, 506th, and 327th Glider Infantry held sectors around the town. Engineers laid mines. Artillery crews fired again and again. Medics worked in cellars and aid stations. Tank destroyer crews from the 705th Tank Destroyer Battalion waited for German armor. Stragglers from broken units were gathered, armed, and placed into the line. This was not a perfect army in perfect condition. It was a town full of cold men trying not to break. Food was low. Ammunition was limited. Medical supplies were short. The weather was cruel. Fog and cloud kept Allied planes away during the worst early days. Wounded men waited in pain. Many had no heavy coats. Some used whatever cloth they could find to cover their hands and feet. Inside Bastogne, the mood was tense but firm. The men knew they were surrounded by December 20th. That word, surrounded, can sound simple. But for a soldier, it means every road out is dangerous. It means no easy rescue. It means every sound in the dark may be the next attack. It means the enemy is not in front of you anymore. The enemy is all around you. The German command believed this pressure would work. They believed the Americans would see the cold, the tanks, the closed roads, and the lack of supplies, then give up. But Bastogne became a place where German logic failed. On December 22nd, German officers sent a surrender demand to the American command. It was a formal message. It said the Americans were surrounded. It warned that the town could be destroyed. It gave them a choice: give up or face the result. The title asks why records show 700 Americans held forces tied to a much larger German attack at Bastogne. Inside Bastogne, Brigadier General Anthony McAuliffe was acting commander of the 101st Airborne. The division commander, Major General Maxwell Taylor, was away in the United States when the crisis began. McAuliffe had to make the decision. The American answer became famous because it was short, strange, and full of defiance. Nuts, no long speech, no soft language, just one word. But that word only had meaning because men were still holding the line outside the town. A surrender answer is not powerful unless the soldiers behind it are ready to make it true. The Germans had the town surrounded, but the Americans had the roads blocked. It needed clear roads. That was the deeper surprise. The men at Naval and other forward positions had helped slow the German clock. The main Bastogne defense had formed. The road center did not fall fast. The German plan needed a quick break, but instead it met delay, fire, traffic jams, fuel problems, and stubborn resistance. At Naval, the cost was heavy. Major WWII was later captured after the fight. Many Americans were killed, wounded, or taken prisoner. The village could not be held forever. That was never the real purpose. The purpose was to buy time, and they bought it with blood. This is where the story becomes almost painful. Families at home did not know these details. A wife might still be setting a plate aside in her mind for Christmas. A mother might still be reading the last letter from France. A child might still believe his father was safe because the war was almost over. But in Belgium, those men were fighting in a freezing village, so other men could dig in around Bastogne. The home front and the battlefield were connected by silence. No one at home could feel the cold in Nauville. No one at home could hear the tank fire around Bastogne. No one at home could know that a few hours bought by a few hundred men might decide if thousands more lived or died. On December 23rd, the weather changed. The sky opened. For the defenders, it felt like a door in heaven had cracked open. Allied planes returned. Supplies came down by parachute. The defenders could breathe again, but they were still not free. The Germans attacked again and again. They pushed with infantry, artillery, and armor. They tried to crush the perimeter. They held time. They tried to break the will of men who had already been cold and hungry for days. It had become a symbol. For the Germans, it was a problem they could not ignore. For the Americans, it was a promise they could not break. And for the wider battle, it became the place where the secret of the German offensive was exposed. The attack looked strong, but it was fragile. It needed fear. It needed defenders to run. Bastogne did not run. The 700 men at the forward roadblock did not win Bastogne by themselves, but they helped create the time that allowed Bastogne to become a fortress. That was the hidden truth inside the records. The Germans came with a plan built on speed. The Americans answered with time, and by December 26th, that time was about to bring steel from the south. By December 26, 1944, Bastogne was still holding. The town was damaged. The men were exhausted. The wounded were many. The cold had entered everything. It was in clothes, weapons, boots, blankets, engines, and bones. But the line was still there. German attacks had not broken it. The surrender demand had not broken it. The isolation had not broken it. From the south, General George Patton's Third Army was moving fast through winter roads to reach Bastogne. Patton had turned part of his army north after the German attack began. This was not easy. It meant shifting men, vehicles, supplies, and plans in terrible weather. But the movement was made, and the pressure grew toward the town. The men inside Bastogne did not know the exact moment help would come. They only knew they had to last. That is what makes this story so strong. A soldier in a foxhole does not hold because a history book tells him he will survive. He holds because the man beside him is still there. He holds because he has orders. He holds because he thinks of home. They held roads. He holds because leaving would mean the road behind him opens. The records of Bastogne show units and dates, but under those lines were human lives. A tanker who had once fixed cars at home now waited for German armor in a Belgian village. A paratrooper who had jumped into Normandy now sat in snow with a rifle across his knees. A medic who had trained to save lives now worked in darkness with less and less to use. A young husband who had promised to return for Christmas now fought near a town most Americans had never known before that week. Every man at Bastogne had a world behind him. Every letter in his pocket had a voice. Every frozen road led back in his mind to someone waiting. That is why the story does not feel like a simple military report. It feels like a personal fight between memory and fear. The German offensive had begun as a secret. It had used surprise like a weapon. It had pushed through the Ardennes with real danger. It had caused panic, loss, and confusion. The shocking reveal is this: Bastogne was not saved by one magic answer, one famous commander, or one perfect unit. It was saved by layers of resistance. The 10th Armored Teams bought the first hours. The 101st Airborne built the ring. The 705th Tank Destroyer Battalion gave the line-sharp teeth against tanks. The artillery kept firing. The engineers blocked roads. The supply drops after December 23rd gave hope and ammunition. The Third Army moved from the south. And yes, at places like Naval, small groups of Americans, sometimes counted in the hundreds, forced German units to pay for every road and every hour. That is why the number 700 matters. Not because it tells the whole story, but because it shows how small the line can look before it changes history. The siege was broken. The first contact did not end all fighting around the town, and the battle in the Ardennes still continued into January 1945. But the closed door had opened. Bastogne had survived. The Germans had failed to take the road center in time. The great winter offensive had lost its clean path. The men who held the perimeter did not see themselves as legends in that moment. Many were too tired to think. Some were still watching the tree lines. Some were helping the wounded. Some were counting friends who were gone. A battle can become famous later, but on the day it happens, it is only fear, duty, noise, cold, and survival. That is why Bastogne still matters. It shows that courage is not always a charge across an open field. Sometimes courage is staying where you are when every part of your body wants to run. Sometimes it is holding a village you cannot keep forever. Sometimes it is delaying a tank column for one more hour. Sometimes it is refusing a surrender paper because the men outside are still fighting. They held the space needed for a larger defense to form. They held the enemy long enough for Bastogne to become impossible to take quickly. And in the Battle of the Bulge, that was enough to change everything. The men at Naval, the men in Bastogne, and the men who broke through from the south were part of one chain. If one link failed, the story could have been different. If the roadblocks collapsed too soon, the Germans could have moved faster. If the 101st had not formed the perimeter, the town could have fallen. If the weather had stayed closed, supplies might not have come. If Patton's men had arrived too late, the cost could have been worse. But the chain held. That is the lesson at the center of Bastogne. History is not only made by the largest armies, it is also made by tired men in small places, holding roads that the world has not yet learned to remember. When people speak of Bastogne today, they often remember the famous word nuts. They remember the 101st Airborne. They remember Patton's tanks. They remember the snow and the siege. But behind all of that, there is another memory. A few hundred men in forward positions stood against a machine that needed to move fast. They could not stop the whole German army by strength alone, so they stopped its clock, and once the clock was broken, the German plan began to die. That is why Bastogne became more than a battle. It became a warning to every army that trusts speed more than the will of defenders. It became proof that even in the darkest winter, a small line of men can hold long enough for dawn to come. If this story helped you see Bastogne in a new way, leave a like, write your comment below, and subscribe to the channel for more forgotten stories from World War II.